The other thing that I don't know if there's a way to make a wiki template and whether it would be worth it in the wiki template space. So this is a planning document that I've been using internally for probably 20 years at this point. The version that I've used for the longest time is an Excel document, not a Google sheet. The columns B through H are all metadata for the project. What's my project number, target journal, what's the IRB number, stuff like that. The meat of it is this table, and each row is an activity that contributes to the paper. Each column is a person, a potential author, and the column L is provisional numbers of points. So as we're thinking about the scope of work for a project, for a meta-analysis, the literature review is much more work and there is no other data collection. And for a data paper, the data collection and cleaning, and so we sort of define what are the key components, what's the relative weight of them, who's contributing what to each component, and and then the key review periods are before we send the paper to the journal. Let's review this together as a group. Do we all agree with the history of contributions as reflected here? Let's discuss authorship with this as the first approximation. Whole bunch of fine print, and there's a story behind every piece of fine print in this, but basically I've lived with it for a long time, and all this is codification of the younger the contributor, the more points they should get for the same work. So the generativity, and if it's student work like a thesis, then they should be the first author unless they're extreme extenuating circumstances. And so that's all operationalized in here. And then because I had someone try to game the system, the no young person bonus unless you've contributed at least 10% of the work to the whole thing. Because I had one person who like literally edited 2 words, and they're like, now I'm a co-author and I'm 4th author, and I'm like, I don't think so. But this particular thing has become very, so these are attached to all 6 of the student-led ones on the, and what it is right now is a link on the discuss page to the Google form for that particular project. For me, this is really important because a lot of the work happened off Wiki, and I need a way of documenting that. And as I'm getting more experience working with things on Wiki, I'm like getting pictures and infographics up and to stick is more work than adding a citation. And that adds to something which we're intending to go to a more general audience. That's a big value add. And to other scholars, other academics, they're like, you're just talking about a picture. I'm like, for this audience, that's important. And have you tried putting a picture on? So for you, this is interesting as a peek behind the curtain of how I'm trying to track authorship and contributions. And I would very much welcome suggestions about how, and I have a sense from what's happened with the COVID and bipolar one, that there's a way of attributing contributions from editors like Ohana and that help make the product better, even though it's not but also per our conversation of trying to figure out how do we do more of this on Wiki. I'm like, okay, I've been using something like this for 20 years. and I have ways that I'm adapting it to reflect the work of Wiki, but I don't know how to make a template of this to have this table or this document be a Wiki
Yeah.
native template.
Yeah. Well, I mean, firstly, love this. The cheap way is to basically copy and paste it, so if it's just a table sitting at the bottom of the document or as a supplementary item, you know, in a subpage or something like that.
Oh.
But the other thing that this links into a little bit more actually is, you may have come across Jack Nunn in some of the board meetings. He's the person who often acts as our facilitator because he's a trained
Yeah.
meetings facilitator and actually manages to get things to work to time. And this sort of thing is his passion, particularly for even more complex situations. So his passion is what he calls STARDIT, which is a standardized assessment and reporting on initiatives or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it stands for. But yeah, so it's a way to be able to do something like this, not only for writing this, but let's say you were organizing a clinical trial that also had a medical writer who also proofread the article for language, and also you had a clinical trial manager who isn't an author as such, but they clearly were important. And then you have a clinical trial participants representative, and all of those sorts of things. How do you include that contributor information that currently isn't on the author list, and because it's not on the author list, basically disappears from the world, and isn't captured? And so he organized, so I'll give you the example link to a full STARDIT form, which is documenting this in, like, this is his example of how much detail could you go into at the maximum. And this is like a 12-page version, but there's a 1-page version of it that does a similar thing. And yeah, it has some similar ideas in terms of how do you get that granular information. And I actually quite like your tabular way of doing it. This is, instead of doing it in a tabular way, this is doing it in a kind of a plain text list kind of a way. But there's some similar ideas in that.
Yeah, well, thank you for the link and the tip. Any reason not to share this with Jack?
I was exactly going to say, do share this with Jack. It might also give him some ideas. I think if you're willing to put it, even just as a plain table in the article at the, when it's submitted, if that is reasonable, I think that it'd be really useful to have that documented, even if eventually, like, one of the things Jack might say is like, oh, that's really cool, I love it, could you also try filling in a STARDIT form to do something similar? And I'm wary of making you do a whole, like, basically duplicating it in a different format to double the work. But even that process, having them side by side, might be a useful way to demonstrate the value of each approach and how they could be combined into one kind of unified, for people who are interested in this sort of level of documentation, particularly since they're probably going to be doing this sort of accounting internally anyway. How do we represent that? Because my interest is then in coding this into Wikidata, so that each article can have this sort of level of information associated with it in the metadata, so that, eventually someday someone who was interested might be able to see, for example, see this person who was a 5th author, like their first few papers, they were, 5th and 6th author, they were just a student helping out with formatting, and then you can see how they kind of rose up the ranks and started publishing their own work, and then they did a mix and whatever.
How many programming classes did you take, or is this entirely self-taught?
This is entirely self-taught. So So look, I only started doing anything like this after my PhD, because at the end of my PhD, I started getting the feeling that I was, the analyses I was using were underpowered, and I wasn't extracting. I'd done all of this work for my PhD, and I was just skimming the surface of what information I could extract out of it. And simultaneously, I've been getting more into Wikipedia and realizing, God, I love those glasses. It just makes you look like you might be a DJ from the 90s.
I just realized the time. These are blue blockers to help me not stay riled up too long after the call.
Okay. Oh, crap. So yeah, what's the time your end? I apologize if I'm keeping you up.
Not at all. No, no, no. I'm loving this. The any extra time with you is time well spent. The facts. The but the yeah. No, I'm just trying to make it so I'm not still up replaying how awesome this was at 2 a.m.
Yep, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, so I'm actually going to send you a quick link to something that I think you'll find interesting. Short URL to results. Oh, no, I can't send you that. I have to send you the full URL. Actually, why would I do that? I'll just share my screen. Share screen. So I don't know if you've come across this before. So there's a site called Scholia, which has a horrible name, but is a great site. And it is basically trying to recapitulate what Google Scholar profiles do, but open source, open data, everything. And so here's the example for me, but you can put in anyone up here and it'll do it. And it'll try and pull out their list of publications and their publications per year. And in particular, things like, okay, well, now we can see this broken down by first author, middle author, corresponding author, solo author, etc.
Wow.
And actually, like, them pulling out venue statistics and co-author graphs.
Holy crap.
So have we co-authored before? I can't remember if we co-authored something. I don't think we have yet. So you won't be on my little network yet. But I have great fondness for my little co-author network. And then, like, these are the topics that I've published on. So it's weighted based on the topics of my own publications and then the topics of the publications that cite me. So I think it gets 1 point for my own publications and a fifth of a point for anything that cites me. So for example, like, yeah, I published on defensins and protein evolution, but then it immediately goes into Wikipedia and health informatics and wiki journals and open data and Wikidata. So you can see kind of the mix of topics that I publish on. And this is all generated from Wikidata. And so it's entirely powered by how complete the information is in Wikidata. So let's see what it comes up with for Eric Youngstrom, American psychologist. That sounds like you. Let's see, so I think the most recent one you did was for bipolar disorders. Number of publications per year, so it's often going to undercount if it's missing some. Yeah, it's definitely missing some of your publications because it thinks you only published 3 times last year, which is not the case. Yeah, so these are the ones where it's managed to pull out the metadata for you. And it thinks that this is currently your entire co-author graph. So as Wikidata becomes better populated, it's better able to represent this sort of information. Yeah. But yeah, so this is kind of where it's going. So this is what I mean by it'll be useful to start encoding more and more of this information as time goes by in a way that Wikidata can understand, so that it can then start doing sensible things like, you know, like these sorts of quite nice graphs, because I think that this is actually more useful than than the standard one that Google Scholar gives you, right? Like, this is what Google Scholar gives me, which is not actually anywhere close to as informative.
No.